What's up, guys? Welcome back to the vlog. After yesterday's session, which you hopefully saw in the last episode, we enjoyed a really soft 1-3 game in our first time playing at the Bellagio. I'd already decided before arriving in Vegas for the week that I wanted to take a shot at playing some 5-10 no-limit hold'em during this trip, and last night's win gave me the encouragement to put my money where my mouth is. Upon arriving at the Bellagio today, I add my name to both the 2-5 and the 5-10 lists. We're pretty far down on the 5-10 list, but after a short wait, we do get called to the 2-5 game. We buy in for the max of 500 and grab a seat. Not even 10 minutes in, we pick up pocket kings in the hijack. There's a $10 straddle, and when it folds to us, I make it 35. Just the straddle calls, so we're heads up to the flop. It's a pretty good one as it comes down 8 deuce 8 rainbow. If our opponent has an 8, we're gonna go broke here, but if not, then we should be pretty well ahead. When he checks to us, I c-bet for 30. We get a quick call, so we're headed to the turn where we see the 9 of spades. We get checked to again, and there's no reason to slow down with the betting here, so I up the bet to 65. Our opponent quickly folds, and we take down our first hand of the day. We don't pick up much of anything playable until almost 30 minutes later when we straddle under the gun. It folds to the small blind, who raises to $25. The big blind folds, and I opt to defend here since it's only $15 more and we've got the power of position. The flop comes Jack 7-5 with 2 diamonds. It's not a great flop for our not so great hand, but when our opponent checks to us, even though betting is probably the only way we're going to win this hand, I'm not ready to start bluffing at this board yet. The turn brings the 5 of hearts pairing the board, so we pick up a flush draw and our opponent leads out now. It's a full pot bet for $35, but I think he could be making a delayed c-bet here with just about anything, so I put in the chips to call. The river brings the 5 of clubs, so now there's 3 5s on the board. Anyone who had a pair before now has a full house, and if our opponent had one, I'd expect him to be betting for value at this point. When he goes with the check though, given the fact that we called his bet on the turn, I think we can represent that hand here now. I make it $50, and he almost folds before we can get the chips out. So we take down a small pot with a nice little bluff on the river. 4 hands later, we've got 10-9 suited in the cutoff. There's a $10 straddle, and it folds to us. I make it $25 with our suited connector, and it folds back to the straddle who calls, so we're heads up to the flop. It comes down 9-6 ace with 2 spades, so we flop second pair. When our opponent checks to us, I think we could check or bet here, and I decided to go with a bet since I don't want to give a free card to any hands we could still be ahead of but vulnerable to. Plus we can represent the ace. I bet about half pot, making it $25 again. We get called after a few seconds of thinking, so we're off to the turn. We see the 3 of hearts, which shouldn't change anything. When our opponent checks to us, I check back this time as there's no reason to bloat the pot here with second pair, and the river brings the 7 of diamonds. Now our opponent leads out for $80. It's a pretty big bet, kind of polarizing on this board, and he's either got an ace or a hand like 8-7 that missed the straight. Without much info on this guy at this point, I opt to call. Our opponent shows ace-queen, and our hand is no good. 4 hands later, we straddle to $10 under the gun. The player on our left raises to 25, and it folds back to us. We look down at 2 red jacks, a beautiful sight in the straddle. No one ever believes you've got a hand here. In retrospect, I think 3-betting here is probably the best play a lot of the time, but I opted just to call at the time. In the moment, I didn't really want to have a 3-bet get called and have to play the rest of the hand out of the position in a bloated pot. The flop's a pretty good one for us though, as it comes down 7-10-8 with 2 clubs. So we've got an overpair with a gut shot to the virtual nuts since it's pretty unlikely our opponent's going to be holding Jack 10 here. I check with the intention of making a check raise, and our opponent c-bets for 35. I spring the trap and raise it up to 125 right away. He thinks for only about 10 seconds before putting the chips in to call. The turn brings the most beautiful card we could hope to see here, the 9 of spades. Not only do we hit our straight, but the flush misses as well. We've got less than a pot-sized bet left, so there's really only one move here.
All in.
Our opponent snap folds, and we take down a nice pot. 15 minutes later, we've got king-jack offsuit in the cutoff. The +1 player limps in, and the +2 player raises to 20. The hijack calls, and we've got an alright hand, one that I think is worth calling and seeing a flop considering we've got position, so I put the chips in. The limper calls as well, so we've got 4 to the flop. It comes down 6-5 king rainbow, so we pick up top pair. It checks to us, and we could definitely bet here since we probably have the best hand, with the limper being the only player I'm unsure of. I opt just to check back since I don't expect there to be too many turns we're worried about though. The turn brings the jack of clubs, so now we've got top 2. When the limper checks again, I'm pretty sure we've got the best of it. It checks to the hijack on the right, who puts out a small bet of $30. There are a few straight and flush draws out there now with only one street to come, so I don't want to slow play this anymore. It's time to build the pot. I raise it up to $80, hoping someone will be interested. Unfortunately, everyone folds, but I'm still happy to take it down. 2 hands later, there's a $10 straddle, and I decide to see what we can get away with at this table, raising to $30 with 8-7 offsuit. It's not a hand I regularly play by any means. Just the straddle calls, so we're heads up to the flop. It comes down 5-Ace-9 with 2 clubs. It's not the worst flop, as we can rep the ace, and if we do get called, we have outs to a gut shot. I put out a small c-bet for $25. The straddler pretty quickly check raises 3x, making it 75. We've got about 11-1 odds to hit our gut shot, but given our stack sizes, we're really only getting about 10-1 implied odds if we're able to hit and get the money in, so it's not quite the right odds assuming such a scenario. That being said, doing poker math at the table is not my strong suit, and I make a loose call just to peel one off and see if we can get there. Needless to say, that doesn't happen as the turn bricks out with the deuce of clubs. Our opponent puts out another bet for $100, and we definitely can't continue here. I throw our hand away. 15 minutes later, there's a $20 raise, and it folds around to us in the big blind. We look down at pocket tens, a pretty nice hand, but definitely not one I want to play out of position. I raise it up pretty big to $80, and that's a big enough bet for us to get a fold. Later that orbit, it folds to us in the +2 position, and we look down at 2 red aces. I raise it up to $15, and it folds over to the cutoff, who 3-bets to 55. The button cold calls the 3-bet, and both blinds get out of the way. It's back on us, and I definitely don't want to get trappy and play this one slow, especially if we're going to be playing out of position or against multiple opponents. I 4-bet to $200. The cutoff clearly likes his hand as he pushes all in for $495 total. The button folds, and our move here is pretty obvious.
I'll call.
I like one.
Aces or kings?
Yeah, I got aces.
Yeah.
That's alright, you'll probably hit. That's how my luck goes. Alright.
Well, no. Just for goodness.
It's a cooler. Thank you very much. That's alright.
Thank you.
Thanks.
20 minutes later, we've got Queen Jack offsuit in the cutoff. The +2 player raises to 15, and the hijack folds. We've got a healthy stack, and I'm feeling encouraged to play a bit more aggressively, so I go for another 3-bet, making it 50. It folds back to the original raiser who calls, and we're off to the flop. It comes down King Queen 3 with 2 diamonds, giving us second pair. Our opponent checks to us, and I think we could check or bet here. We've shown aggression, and this board favors our 3-betting range. However, I don't want to bloat the pot when we've got showdown value at this point, and I decide on a check, taking the free card. And it's a pretty good card as we see the Jack of Hearts giving us 2 pair now. Our opponent checks again, and I put out a bet of $45. We get a pretty quick call, so we're off to the river, which brings the deuce of diamonds. The front door flush comes in, and when our opponent checks a third time, I end up checking back. I announce our hand, and it's good. In retrospect, I do think betting here is the better play, as we probably have the best hand, and we're missing out on value by checking back here in the long run. If we get check raised, we're most likely behind, and we can fold our hand at that point. 20 minutes later, we straddle for $10 under the gun, and it folds around to the big blind, who puts in a pretty big raise to $40. Considering he's out of position, it's not the biggest raise, and he probably doesn't want us calling with a marginal hand, but we've actually got a premium here. I think there's an argument for 3-betting, but given the size of his raise, I opt just to call. The flop is Jack-Jack-10 with 2 hearts, so we're open-ended with 2 overs. He c-bets for $30, and I think we could call or raise here. I go with the call so we can see our opponent proceeds on the turn. It bricks out with the deuce of clubs, and our opponent checks now. I'm not inclined to bet yet since there's a chance he's got a smaller medium pocket pair that would probably call us here. I'd rather take the free card to see if we can improve. And we do just that when the river brings the king of hearts, so we pick up top pair now. Our opponent checks again, and now it's time to get some value. I put out a bet of $55, and we get a quick call. Our opponent taps his cards on the table, mucks, and our hand is good. Almost 30 minutes later, we've got ace-9 suited and diamonds in the +1 position. The first player folds, and I raise it up to $15. There's one call behind us before the button squeezes, making it $65. I've taken note that up to this point, this player's been squeezing quite a bit and getting away with it, and I've been thinking about taking a chance at coming back over the top of him should the opportunity present itself. With that in mind, when it folds back to us, I 4-bet to $200. This should look pretty strong, especially given our position being second to act. It folds back to the squeezer, who doesn't think too long before pushing all in, unfortunately, having us covered. It looks like we ran into it, and we're gonna have to get away here after torching some of our profit. 4 hands later, we've got 8-7 offsuit in the button. It falls to the cutoff, who raises it up to $15. I decided to make a loose call here since we've got position, and I feel like I'm able to make good reads and play better after the flop. The big blind has other plans though, as he 3-bets to 55. I'm planning to fold here until I see the original razor call. With that, sure, we don't have a great hand, but it's $40 to win over 125, so we're getting better than 3-1 odds, and I decided to play this one Texas style and join along. The flop is about as bad as it could be for our hand, as it comes down 10-king-3 with 2 spades. However, the pre-flop 3-better checks and the original razor checks as well. I considered bluffing briefly, but I decided against doing that into 2 razors, so I check behind to take our free card. The turn brings the 7 of hearts, so we pick up a pair now. The action checks around once more, so we all get a free river in the form of the 3 of hearts pairing the board. The pre-flop 3-better leads now for $70. The cutoff folds, and although we're behind some pairs like jacks or nines that were scared on the flop, we're still ahead of hands like ace-queen or ace-jack that didn't hit anything and are trying to pick up the pot now. I put in the chips to call, and our opponent shows ace-jack. Our hand is good, and he's not happy about it.
Wow, what a pre-flop call.
She called. I was like, all right, there's 3 people. 2, you know.
Call with packet deuces. But,
Yeah.
if you don't after me.
About 25 minutes later, there's a late position raise from the cutoff who makes it 20. I opt to defend in the big blind with 6-4 suited, so we're heads up to the flop. It comes down 9 ace-king with 2 spades, so we've got a flush draw. I check, and the cutoff makes a pretty small c-bet for $15. We're definitely calling with our draw, and we get a pretty great turn in the form of the jack of spades. So we hit our hand, and I make about a half-size pot, leading for $30. We get a call, and the river brings an unfortunate 7 of spades, putting a 4-liner to a flush on the board. I check since we're not getting any bigger flushes to fold, and our opponent puts out a bit of a larger bet, making it $75. Eventually, I decide there are enough bluffs he could be doing this with in this position, and I make the call.
All right, show me the spade. I got a flush.
You see, never bluff, never bluff. They all 6 side call. Never bluff, man. Never bluff. They always
Thank
call.
you.
It'll be on the blog.
We don't see much for 40 minutes until we've got 8-7 suited in the cutoff. Action folds to the hijack, who makes it $20. In the previous hand that I didn't capture, unfortunately, the same player had 8-7 of spades, the exact hand we have now, and he made a squeeze play and took it down. I thought it would be pretty funny to do the same here, not to mention this is a hand that I would do the same with anyway, so I go for a 3-bet myself against the same player, making it $65. Unfortunately, the big blind has other plans as he makes a massive cold 4-bet to $265. Obviously, we're throwing this one away as we're not even remotely getting a good price to see a flop.
Here you go, man. I tried.
Yeah, you got trapped. 8-7.
8-7 suited. Is this it?
I had you beat.
Most of the rest of the 2-5 session turns out to be pretty uneventful. We pick up some premiums, make some raises and c-bets that get called when we don't connect, and our stack dwindles a bit. Eventually, I get up and grab some dinner before coming back when our name's finally called for the 5-10 game. We buy in for $1,000 and grab our seat. 10 minutes in, we've got ace-10 offsuit in the cutoff. Action folds to us, and I raise to 30. The button calls, and the big blind joins along as well, so we've got 3 players to the flop. It comes down king-queen-7 with 2 diamonds. The big blind checks, and I think we could better check here. We've got a gut shot and the backdoor flush draw, but I take the conservative route and just check. The button checks behind, and we get a pretty great turn in the form of the jack of diamonds, so we pick up Broadway with a royal flush redraw. The big blind leads out now for half pot, $50. I don't want to miss out on building a pot, so I 3x his bet, making it $150. The button on our left then cold calls our raise, which has me raising my eyebrows, and the original better folds, so we're heads up now. The river brings the ace of spades, putting a 4-liner to a straight on board. In retrospect, I think betting out here is the best play with the idea that we could fold to a raise, but given the cold call on the turn, I'm a little wary in the moment of the flush, and I end up just going with a check. It unfortunately checks through, which tells me we've got the best hand and missed out on some value here. The button shows king-queen for top 2 on the flop, so we definitely could have gotten another bet out of him. 4 hands later, we've got 5-4 suited in hearts. I raised to $40 first to act, and just the small blind makes the call. The flop comes down 10 jack deuce with 2 hearts, giving us a flush draw. The small blind checks, and I c-bet for 50. We We get a quick call, and we're headed to the turn where we see the 8 of hearts giving us our flush. Our opponent now leads into us for $105. I think we could call or raise here. Raising is the obvious play since we've made our hand, but I think it shows that we're not scared of the flush and makes our hand pretty transparent. By calling, we can hopefully induce another bet on the river with our opponent thinking they're ahead. To help give him that incentive, I fake a heart check as if to make it seem like I'm calling with a flush draw before putting the chips in. The river is not what we wanted to see though, as it brings the 3 of hearts, putting a 4-liner to a flush on board for the second time today. Our opponent checks to us, and initially I'm planning to check back. However, I start thinking about his lead on the turn, which implied he wasn't scared of the flush, followed by his check on the river, which implies he might be concerned now. Although unlikely, it's possible we were on a flush over flush scenario on the turn. And given my fake heart check on the turn, I could make a sizable bet here, turning our hand into a bluff, hoping to get some smaller flushes that are still ahead of us to fold. With that in mind, I put out a bet of $220. After almost a minute of thinking, our opponent shakes his head and throws his hand in. I ask if he had hearts, which he confirms he did, assuming we believe him. So if that's right, then we made a great bet on the river. More than 30 minutes pass before we pick up ace-king offsuit in the small blind. The +2 player raises to 30, and it folds back to us. I'm still feeling a little bit intimidated at these stakes, and I'm a bit worried about making a big 3-bet and having to play out of position, so I end up taking the weak line by just calling here. The big blind joins along as well, so we've got 3 players to the flop. It comes down Jack-King 5 with 2 hearts, giving us top pair. We check to the pre-flop raiser, who c-bets for 40. I don't want the big blind to join along cheaply any further, so I go with a check raise, making it 140 total. The big blind gets out of the way, and the better folds as well, so we take it down. 15 minutes later, we've got ace-king again, but this time it's suited, and we're in a much better position. There's an early position raise to $30, and it folds to us. I 3-bet to 100, and the original raiser decides this is a good enough price to join along, so we're heads up to the flop. It comes down deuce 6-10 rainbow, so we whiff completely. Still, when our opponent checks to us, I think it's worth making a c-bet, and I put out a bet of $90. Unfortunately, we get a call, and the turn doesn't help us as it brings the 9 of hearts. This is definitely a better card for our opponent if they had any kind of weak draw on the flop. When he checks to us again, I'm slowing down here, checking back for the free card. The river bricks out with the 3 of diamonds, and now our opponent leads into us for $250. This is a pretty polarizing bet. He's either got a big hand or he's completely bluffing at the pot now since we've shown weakness. We've got the nut no pair hand here, but we're only beating a bluff and nothing else. I consider a call in case he's got a hand like ace-queen or maybe ace-jack, but I think there are better spots for us to make such plays, and I throw our hand away instead. 10 minutes later, we've got 5-4 suited in hearts again. There's an early position limp from a player who's been doing so with a wide range of hands. I decide to limp along as well in the hijack with our suited connectors too, and the big blind raises to 50. The original limper calls, so I call as well with position. The flop comes down king 5-7 with 2 diamonds. The big blind makes a pretty weak lead here for $50. Considering he's up against 2 other players, he's out of position, and there's a flush draw on the board, I imagine he'd be betting bigger to protect his hand if he had something strong here. The limper gets out of the way, and while we could raise here, I opt to start with a call. The turn is the jack of clubs, and when our opponent checks to us now, I think we can bet big in hopes of taking it down. I make it 120, and after a few seconds, he throws his hand in. We take down one last pot before calling it a night.
All right, so we played the 2-5 game for about 4 hours, bought in for 500, and at our peak we were up a little over 1,200. Our stack was at a little over $1,200, so up a little over 700, maybe 800 at some point. But gave a little bit back, cashed out for 900 even, so won $400. Happy to take the win. Played at the 5-10 game for a little under 2 hours, bought in for 1,000, cashed out for about $1,375. So $375 win, which is great, like dollar-wise. Not as big a win as it probably could have done if I was able and willing to play longer. Maybe. I easily could have lost, of course, too. But I kind of got tired at the end there. I could feel myself reaching the point of exhaustion, and don't want to play when I'm tired, so just called it a night, and gonna head back to the hotel room for now, and probably gonna come back here and play some more tomorrow. So thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Hit the like and subscribe. Take care. Thanks.